What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions of the Thaumaturge, a narrative RPG that released just yesterday from the time of this video, and it is a game I've been following since it was announced and managed to cover via a demo at Steam Next Fest even a little while back. Needless to say, I was pretty excited about it. This game puts us in the role of an alternative history 1905, specifically in Warsaw, Poland, where thaumaturges are a very real thing, and while it is a genetic thing, people are born that way, they go around removing demons called salutors that have attached themselves to people, which generally involves getting to the bottom of the mysteries, why that person is the way they are, and what made the salutor or the demon attach itself to that person in the first place. Which is a very roundabout way of saying that the game is very heavy on its detective side of things that leans into a very noir occult setting, and if you've watched the channel at all, that's exactly the kind of thing I enjoy. Right away, those investigations and running around and talking to people are the bulk of the game. There is a turn-based combat mode, and we'll get into that, but this is a CRPG much in the way Planescape Torment is. The story, I would say, is the big thing, with combat being more of a secondary thing. Now, to be a little more specific with the setup for that story, we play as Victor Shulsky, our thaumaturge, as it were, who is returning to Warsaw to deal with some urgent family matters. We don't actually start the game in Warsaw, we rather start the game just outside of it, really, trying to get to the bottom of a few different problems and solve our own immediate issues. This immediately puts us in the presence of one Gregory Rasputin, and we'll go on to meet other notable historical figures of the time, which is important, I imagine, especially since Rasputin is known to be involved in a lot of mystical urban legends that I'm almost sure will be playing pretty heavily into this game in some way. But I love the introduction to this game for a few different reasons. For starters, I think it does a great job of telling you what the game is all about. You start out in this village, seeing all this supernatural flashback stuff, only to then have to go investigate villagers, see which one of them is being haunted, and then solving that problem. And then, once you get to Warsaw and you're able to wander around a little more freely, you'll encounter quests pretty naturally just by finding things, interacting with them, etc., which is pretty cool because as a thaumaturge, our sense of perception is very heightened, and the way we solve a lot of these mysteries and make conclusions is that you're able to discern emotions and intent from touching certain objects, provided they had some sort of strong emotional connection to begin with, and this is what allows you to get to the root of how people are feeling and whether or not they may be dealing with a salutor of some sort, which also bleeds into the primary way you're going to gain experience, which is just that, encountering and reading all of those notes and clues, in addition to jumping into combat itself. As you gain experience, you'll of course level up, which leads us to a pretty simple progression system that affects both exploration and combat, which I thought was a little interesting. Basically, your thaumaturge abilities are divided up into 4 powers. Each of the demons or salutors is associated with one of them, and further progression in each of those disciplines is actually blocked off by which salutors you've found and interacted with, which is especially interesting because I think you don't actually have to encounter or find all of them, because as it stands, when we find and deal with these situations, that salutor is collected by us, more or less. It becomes one that we can call on and have it help us out. And some of them appear, at least at first impressions wise, to be optional, which I thought was cool. Another thing increasing these does for you, though, is granting you abilities and modifiers to those abilities to use in combat. Combat is a turn-based affair that is most readily comparable to Pokemon, weirdly enough, where you and your salutors will face off enemies in turn-based combat that uses a time mechanic that you can see up on the top there. Every attack you make has a timer associated with it, which puts you on the battle queue, if you will, alongside enemies, and certain abilities can delay or hinder their actions in some way, which is helpful. And then there's also a focus system. Both you and the enemy have focus associated with your stats, and breaking that focus stuns you and allows you to be hit or deal a big, strong attack that deals a ton of damage. Now, your Salutors are heavily involved in this combat because enemies will sometimes have traits associated with them, and individual Salutors, based on which of the sort of 4 Thaumaturge disciplines they are associated with, can then break those traits. It's also to break them by reducing their focus down to 0, and sometimes this protects enemies from damage, etc., so you have to kind of deal with that mechanic. And another thing I liked about the tutorial is that the game makes it very clear that the focus is on the story first and combat is secondary, which is why the game allows you to play a good bit of that intro tutorial before the first big fight, at which point it asks you what you would like the combat difficulty set to, which is basically easy, normal, or hard, which is going to determine how much or how little you need to involve yourself with this system, which I thought was probably the right move for a game that mostly leans into that big detective aspect. This was a good way to approach difficulty. Now, first impressions wise, I think that just about covers everything. The last thing I want to mention in this video, because it is so close to release, being that on the technical side of things, I've been mostly in a good spot. Really, the worst I've encountered so far is visual bugs, textures loading in very poorly, your character loading in like half buried in the street before suddenly popping back up to where he's supposed to be. So there are a few of those things. Now, how bad that gets, or if I run into anything game-breaking, is yet to be seen, but so far, mostly so good. Now, looking forward as I move to properly review this title, I'm keeping an eye on a few things. For starters, I've gotten to the city of Warsaw. It seems pretty big and explorable. There seems to be a lot of optional content even, side quests that don't seem to be mandatory in any way, investigations into Salutors that don't seem mandatory, which is very cool. And there's even stuff that will allow you to change your appearance and hairstyle. So it seems like they want the city to be a big deal. And the quality of that exploration, those side quests, and how the writing holds up across this game, where that is an incredibly important factor, will, I think, be what determines how good this is in the long run. But first impressions wise, I'm enjoying it a great deal. Cool premise, cool atmosphere. Well-handled execution of things like tutorializing the player, and my main thing now is waiting to see how that holds up over the course of the game. But as of right now, that's going to do it for this video. So I certainly hope you enjoyed it, hope you found it informative. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. I will have a review for this incoming as quickly as I can. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.